From America's Test Kitchen Bread Illustrated book, on page 52 and 53, we have almost no-knead bread. It's called almost no-knead bread because, other than about a minute of kneading after the dough has had a chance to sit for anywhere from 8 to 18 hours at room temperature, there's no kneading involved. All we're going to do is mix the dough ingredients together, and then we're going to let it sit and do a natural overnight fermentation. We're going to use a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast, which is very little, and it's going to make 1 loaf of bread that we're going to cook in a Dutch oven. So I'm going to record the first part of this video now, showing how the dough is put together. I'm going to put it in a bowl with a cover, and I'm going to let it sit out at room temperature overnight until tomorrow around 10 or so in the morning. It's about 4:30 now. So around 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, it'll be 18 hours. I'll knead the dough for a minute, and then it'll take an hour and a half to 2 hours for it to do its final rise in the shaped loaf, which is going to be round, and then it'll bake in the oven until done, which should take somewhere between 50 to 60 minutes. So let's mix the dough. As you can see, I've got all of my mixing apparatus out, and I'm going to measure the ingredients, starting with 15 ounces of all-purpose flour. So I'm going to measure it straight into the bowl, and it calls for 3 cups, which by my way of measuring is 360 grams. It's 120 grams per cup. And I just feel more confident with that measurement in ounces. So, yeah. I don't know that 1 gram of flour is going to matter, but what the hey, let's get right on it. 360. Okay. What else? 1½ teaspoons of salt. Now, salt does 2 things in bread, at least 2 things. One thing it does is flavor the dough, obviously. And if you've done any cooking, you know that salt is vital to the flavor of a dish. And the other thing it does in bread is it slows down the action of the yeast, which we want to do in this case because we're going to let it rise, actually ferment, pardon me, for 18 hours, and we don't need a whole lot of rising activity going on in that time, so this slows it down so that otherwise the dough would become very, very puffy and risen, and we don't necessarily want that in a slow rising dough. So that was 1/4 teaspoon of instant or fast rising yeast, and I did a little study about yeast, and yeast, active dry yeast in the powdered form like this, was invented in the 1940s by Fleischmann, and it was used by the U.S. military. And it was invented at their request. So now we need 3/4 of a cup of water, which is going to be 180 grams, 240 grams in a cup of water. I stopped thinking and I poured too much. But it's easy enough to pour it back out. So this is the 4th recipe that I've baked. That's 181. You think 1 gram's going to matter? I don't, but I'm going to get it right anyway. 180 grams. So this is the 4th that I've baked out of this book, which means there's only about 96 left. 4 ounces of beer. I had to buy beer today, which I haven't done in about, I probably haven't bought beer in 16 years. And I need 1/4 cup, no, 1/2 cup, so that's 120 grams. But the next recipe in the book is Italian bread, and it uses beer as well, so it won't go to waste. The beer is there for flavor, 120 grams, which is 1/2 cup. So it's there for flavor because this is going to kind of mimic a sourdough bread. The other thing, and this is the part that's going to make it sour, distilled white vinegar, 1 tablespoon. And so the alcohol will evaporate, and then if it's not all gone before it goes in the oven, when it goes in the oven it'll boil out, and that's that. So these are all the ingredients. Now I'm supposed to whisk these dry ingredients together in the bowl. Whisk, whisk, whisk. Whiskey, whiskey, whiskey. No, we're using beer, not whiskey. There are some recipes that call for rum or other alcohols. Usually they make a note that those are optional, which is good because I don't really fancy going to the liquor store to buy a quantity of alcohol that I won't use for anything, since I don't drink and I don't know anybody that does, really. So, yeah. But in this case, this is meant to add flavor to the dough, and that's its sole purpose. So now we've whisked the flour, the salt, and the yeast together in a large bowl, and we've whisked the liquid in a measuring cup, and now using a rubber spatula, we're going to mix this with this until it forms a cohesive dough. So let us proceed. So I always start out by sort of doing what's like kind of like folding, so that the flour doesn't go everywhere, because I don't like cleaning up a mess if I can avoid it. So I go slowly. It slowly comes together. Now, as an experiment, I'm going to make a version of this bread, but I'm going to use sourdough starter. And I'm going to leave out the vinegar and the beer, since sourdough will impart the flavor. Okay, I've mixed that. Scraping dry flour until the dough starts to form. No dry flour remains. So I'm going to scrape this off. I washed my hands before I started all this, just so you know. And now I'm going to quickly make it come together. Mix, mix, mix. And where does it say to put this? In a bowl covered tightly. So I'm not going to use this bowl. I'm going to switch it into a different bowl because I can, and it's easier to take care of it that way. So interestingly, there's a technique that's called poolish. It's like foolish, but with a P. And in using poolish, you take flour, water, and a tiny bit of yeast, and you let it set overnight up to 18 hours until it has a chance to ferment, and you'll know that it's fermenting because it'll be all, it's pretty loose. It's not like this. This is more of an actual dough. But the poolish will sit and it'll ferment, and then you mix that with some additional flour and yeast to make the final dough. And the purpose of that is that long fermentation overnight builds flavor. So this dough is really quite wet. It's 85% hydration. So let me think about that for a minute. I had 180 and 120, that's 300, and I had 360 of flour. So that's 80%, isn't it? Yeah. 30 over 36, 5/6, yeah. 5 times 17 is 85, yeah. So there you go. That's what it's supposed to look like. I mean, it's pretty wet. But now all we have to do is set a clock. We'll set a timer for 18 hours. Can you do that? Yes, it's set. Okay, good. And we'll come back and we'll check it. We'll knead it for a minute, it says, and then shape it into a ball. We'll let it rise for an hour and a half to 2 hours until it's doubled in size. And we'll do the pokey test, and then we'll bake this thing. All right. We'll record again tomorrow. All right, step 2 is knead the dough. So we're gonna, yeah, we did that. So we have a 18 by 12 inch sheet of parchment on the counter, and we're gonna lightly spray it with vegetable oil. Bueno. We're going to transfer the dough to a lightly floured counter, and we're going to knead it by hand. All right. Looks light to me. Well, this dough is extremely wet, but it appears to be coming together okay. So we're just kneading by hand. Done. Let it rise for an hour and a half to 2 hours. Bake. So, we'll be back.
Cleaning up the stuff. Paints are really strong. I've got a whole box of this stuff put away.
Yeah, it's in a suitcase. Okay, this dough is so
You know,
wet.
when we do something, we don't do it half-assed.
No, we don't.
We go all the way.
Yep.
Yep. All and nothing at all.
Yep. Hey Google, set a timer for 30 minutes. That's that. This is the finished loaf. It baked for about 50 minutes. You can see I've already cut it and eaten part of it. It turned out quite good. There's well, I think that it's got a little bit of bitterness to the crust particularly. Just a little something. I think that's from the beer. I used Bush beer, I believe, and which is a light lager. And I thought that that would be fine. Maybe a different beer would give it less of that flavor, but the dough reached 209 degrees in the oven when I checked it, and I let it cool for about a half an hour before I sliced it and ate it. You should let it cool for longer than that, at least an hour and a half to 2 hours. The book says 3 hours. But I was impatient because I wanted to taste it, and it's not going to last long enough for it to really make a heck of a lot of difference. When you cut bread too early, the evaporation of the moisture on the inside happens weirdly. If you leave it intact, it evaporates slowly out of the crust, and the internal structure, the crumb, as they call it, will develop better and drier, which is nice. This is moist because I've cut it, and so all of the heat escapes rapidly, and that's not ideal. But, you know, it's still a delicious loaf of bread. It was an experiment after all, and that'll be that. Until the next time, I will see you later.